Hello, everybody. We're going to jump into Unit 3, Day 11 here, which is the presidency of John Adams. John Adams, of course, had been around since the American Revolution, had been very influential in that, had served as George Washington's vice president, and now gets his chance to be president. Now, he will only be a one-term president, so he'll be our first president that only lasts one term. Needless to say, a lot of big things happened during his presidency. Some of them going to have long-lasting effects. The first big thing that you're going to see that he has to deal with is the same issue that George Washington had to deal with, and that was the issue of France and the French Revolution. Now, John Adams takes the viewpoint of, I want to try to avoid war with France, everything possible to try to avoid it, because he realized how weak we were as a country at that point, that we couldn't just afford to be fighting wars left and right, because we're not in the financial position to be able to do that. So his is going to be marked by that. He's going to have the outside influence of Alexander Hamilton, who at this point, Alexander Hamilton was no longer involved in directly in politics because of the first sex scandal to happen in the new country, with it coming out that Alexander Hamilton had had an affair on his wife. And during those days, that pretty much disqualified you from being in politics anymore. Nonetheless, though, Alexander Hamilton still has a massive influence, especially under those people who are in government during that time. So Alexander Hamilton very much tries to push for a possible war with France, which is going to lead to a very high profile, almost you could say a breakup between Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, since they were in the same political party. So with that war with France, or the almost quasi-war is what they call with France, you're going to see out of that, the build-up to that, the XYZ affair happen. And basically what happens with the XYZ affair is that you're going to have three French agents known as X, Y, and Z. And basically, they're going to try to extort the U.S. government for the French not to go to war against us. Now, because of this, the American people would find out about this and not be very happy. In fact, a lot of people in the American government would be ready, or in the American public would be ready to go to war with France over this, because it looked like as an affront to our national sovereignty to say, hey, we're basically going to say, give us this money and we won't go to war with you. A lot of people weren't very happy with the whole XYZ affair. Again, to credit John Adams, he does a good job of kind of quelling the American people as well as the government to not go to war with France. Probably the biggest major thing to come out of John Adams' presidency is going to be the Alien and Sedition Acts. Again, this relates to possible war with France and concern over French agents being here and all kinds of different things going on. That Congress had passed the Alien Sedition Acts. John Adams felt a little uneasy about passing these or about signing them, but he did sign them because he thought in his mind that it was the will of the people, because the people's representatives had brought them to them. Now, what were the Alien Sedition Acts? Well, first, the Alien Act put a lot of restrictions on who could become a citizen and how long the process it would be to become a citizen, making it a lot longer process. But the big thing with it is the Sedition Act, which basically made it against the law to say anything negative about the government and about those in charge of the U.S. government. Now, justifiably so, the Democratic Republicans during this time, going back to Alexander Hamilton and Jefferson being those first two political parties, you're going to see the Democratic Republicans cry and say, hey, this is against First Amendment rights, that we have freedom of speech. And once you're taking out saying we can't speak against the government, that's wrong, and that directly violates the Constitution. Now, because the Federalists had such a good stronghold on the government during this time and on the courts. Remember, George Washington had overseen the setup of the court, so it's going to be a lot of Federalists on it. John Adams is in there as president, so he's going to put Federalists in the courts. So they decide to not go the route of the courts in this, and you're going to have in what would be considered during this time a criminal act, because it's sedition against the government, talking against the government. You're going to have James Madison and Thomas Jefferson team up to write the Kentucky and Virginia Resolution. And basically in these resolutions, they're going to state their states' rights view of the government, and they're going to put forth a principle called nullification. And the idea behind that is that if a state is unhappy with the laws passed by the federal government, that the state can nullify those federal laws, basically meaning we are not going to follow those federal laws at all. Now, this will be very important in 30 years or so during Andrew Jackson's presidency. But you're also going to see that'll be influential building up to the Civil War as well, this whole idea of a states' rights view of the Constitution. So the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions would be passed saying that, hey, states can disobey these laws if they want to. Another thing with this is that you are going to see that there's going to be a very high profile split between Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. As I said, John Adams wasn't as gung-ho about going to war as Alexander Hamilton was. So because of that, and because of basically Adams telling his people in his administration, look, I am president, not Alexander Hamilton. And even though Hamilton wants to do this, I'm president, I make the decisions. He doesn't. That is going to lead Alexander Hamilton to writing a very negative pamphlet about John Adams right before the election of 1800. And many believe that that cost John Adams the election because you have his own party, a lot of people, Alexander Hamilton, who a lot of people saw as the leader of the Federalist Party, coming out attacking the Federalist president, saying, hey, I don't think he's fit to be president, which is ironic that he would do that, given that John Adams would be running against Thomas Jefferson, who of course was one of Alexander Hamilton's sworn enemies. So, yeah. So again, the big things in John Adams' presidency, the XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts. So John Adams would lose. We'd get to the election of 1800, which would be a controversial election because to this point, the way that president and vice president were figured out is the top two electoral vote getters would be president and vice president. So if we're looking at like the election of 2016, it would be Donald Trump president, Hillary Clinton vice president. You might see the conflict that could cause between the two there. Well, usually the way that they would make that happen is that one elector would not vote, whoever they wanted to be vice president, one elector would just choose not to cast a vote for him, and that way you'd have your winner and your vice president then. Well, in this election, the electoral votes end up being tied. John Adams loses, but there is a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Now, it was basically understood by people that, hey, Thomas Jefferson should be president, Aaron Burr should be vice president. But because the electors didn't do their votes right, you have a tie happen between those two, which in the case of a tie like that, the election is going to go to the House of Representatives. House of Representatives dominated by the Federalists during this time. So the Federalists decide, some people in the Federalist Party decide, hey, we can keep this election in limbo for a while. I mean, we could keep it in limbo enough and possibly not get either of these guys as president and just keep John Adams as president. Now, we call this election a peaceful transition of power, but just know that it was very close to, you could have had war being fought between the two sides over this. So House of Representatives would end up voting 36 times before they would decide in the favor of Thomas Jefferson. And you might be wondering, well, what changed over all those votes? Well, Alexander Hamilton, I guess, decides to lay down his pride, and he sees what could possibly happen, that we could eventually end up in another war and have the end of our government completely. He encourages the Federalists to vote for Thomas Jefferson because there was one man that Alexander Hamilton disliked more than Thomas Jefferson, and that was Aaron Burr. He did not want Aaron Burr to be president, so they cast their votes, finally that 36th time, and Thomas Jefferson would be selected the next president of the United States. So this is the first peaceful transition of power between political parties that you are going to see. That doesn't mean that everything is peaceful because you are going to see that John Adams actually refuses to stay in the new Washington, D.C. For Thomas Jefferson's election and actually leaves without seeing his old friend, Thomas Jefferson, be elected president of the United States. Another notable thing that reminded me during John Adams' presidency is you are going to have John Adams be the first U.S. president to reside in the White House, which he moved in a little bit before its completion, but he would move in. So now you officially have the center of the U.S. government being in Washington, D.C. there. So a lot covered there in John Adams' presidency, as you're going to read through in C. And this is going to bring us to our next unit and to what Jefferson called the Revolution of 1800. When you're going to start to see a change in our government and a weakening of the Federalist Party and really a move towards Jefferson's ideals of America and the Democratic Republican Party. So enjoy reading through this and learning a little bit about John Adams' presidency. Make sure you go through and do that test review. And again, I hope that helps you on your test. So as always, if you need me, I am here. Let me know and have a great day.